Coming up on Business Incorporated. Bank of Ghana has authorized 9 institutions to serve as foreign exchange brokers. The government of Rwanda secures 37 million euros to develop the country's drone industry. Plus, we'll take stock of Africa's commodity trade in 2022 and get an outlook for 2023. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ladi Williams. First off, let's take a look at how your money is performing at intraday, starting on the African continent. We see it's mostly positive sentiment in Africa right now. We see it's the NGX continuing that bullish run, even though we had a pullback yesterday. It's 50,887 points. It's up 0.04%. Marginal increase, just as we had at intraday yesterday, but ended up closing in the red. Let's see how that happens today. South Africa there, up 1.07%. Other markets we track now in the North African region. We see Egypt there, that's closed, but it closed green yesterday. A big move up, almost 3%, 2.86%. We see Kenya also closing positive yesterday. Let's move over now to the Middle East. We see sentiment there. It's mostly negative. We see in the UAE, Abu Dhabi and Dubai indexes both down. Abu Dhabi down over 0.5%, 10,197 points. And we see the Dubai index trading down also 0.43% at intraday. While all markets are closed, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, see the Saudi index closed unchanged yesterday, while the Qatari index as a lone gainer there, up 2.77%, a big move up for the Qatari index. Let's move on to Europe now. We see car maker Mercedes plans to build a global electric car charging network, and we also take a look at some power export data coming out of Germany. Let's talk to Rob Watts right there in Berlin. Great to have you, Rob. So, German car maker Mercedes has announced plans to help it further compete with Tesla. What does the company have up its sleeve?
Well, one of the things that separates Tesla from other electric car makers is the fact it has its own charging points across the globe. And that's exactly what Mercedes-Benz is now planning to develop as well. It wants to complete a worldwide charging network of its own over the next 6 to 7 years, with 400 charging stations and over 2,500 high-power plugs. Now, Mercedes made the announcement at the CES Gadget Show in Las Vegas, and it is its plan to begin the build-out in the United States, with networks in Europe and China to follow. Mercedes says that its charging points are going to be available for anyone to use, which actually does set it apart from Tesla, whose chargers are mostly for exclusive use by Tesla owners, although Elon Musk has said that that is going to change. Mercedes still has a long way to go, though, to catch up in terms of numbers with Tesla. Its 2,500 ports will be some way short of Tesla's 40,000 worldwide.
And in 2022 was all about Germany's energy problem, but it seems Germany exported more power in 2022.
Well, it shows that Germany actually exported more energy last year than it imported, which does seem incredible given the country's frantic efforts to find alternative energy sources to Russian gas during 2022. But last year was Germany's best ever year for renewable energy generation. There was lots of sun and plenty of wind, I can tell you, and that meant it was able to step up exports to its powerful neighbour France, who had enormous problems during 2022 with its nuclear energy network. Now, Germany is also a big exporter to Switzerland and to Austria, and this latest data does show that those countries remain dependent on German energy for when their own supplies run short. However, Germany is still importing a lot of energy. The Netherlands and the Nordic countries were major suppliers during 2022.
I guess nature helping the exports there of power. But how do markets looking in Europe?
Well, an upbeat week on markets was somewhat tempered on Thursday. Our old friend Fed dread set in, with data showing tight labour conditions in the US, raising the likelihood of the Federal Reserve keeping its interest rates higher and for longer. And we've seen the impact of that on markets all throughout this year and last year. We know how the American Central Bank tends to set the tone for central banks elsewhere. European media stocks also took a hit on Thursday after Bank of America downgraded its rating for British education group Pearson from neutral to underperform. And there was also data showing that German exports unexpectedly fell last month. That also knocked markets, but they will be hoping to regain some of that New Year optimism that we saw during the rest of the week on the final day of trading.
Yeah, investors, all eyes on the Fed. That's the U.S. Fed going forward. Thank you so much. That's Rob Batts right there in Berlin. Moving on to the U.K. now. We have Juliana standing by right there, and it's all about windfall taxes. Obviously, that was the what we talked about mostly in 2022, and that's coming into 2023 at this point. Great to have you, Juliana. So Shell set to pay 1.7 billion pounds in the UK and in EU for windfall taxes. Quite a big number.
It is quite a big number, Laddie. We've just had this update, this pre-briefing update to investors from Shell ahead of their full-year update, which we're not expecting until the 4th of February. And of course, they've got a new CEO, the Lebanese-Canadian Wael Sawan, who'll be fully aware that it is quite interesting times for the fossil fuel industry. I think they've become kind of the pariah that we saw about the tobacco industry a few years ago, because of course it is a very dirty exploitation and investors are trying to desperately move away from it. We had an announcement by HSBC, I think it was a week ago, just before Christmas, saying that they will be no longer investing in new oil and gas projects. And so many investors are also moving away. So I think this year, Shell wanted to show that they are paying a lot of money. In fact, nearly $2 billion to the UK and the EU and about $4 billion globally. But is that going to be enough when they are, of course, continuing to profit from the bloody war in Ukraine? I think in the update earlier today, they said that they had made more in the fourth quarter than they did in the third quarter, and they already reported extraordinary profit. So yes, as I said, it is interesting times for them. 2 billion may seem a lot, but when they're raking in tens as more, it's not that much on paper.
Right. Yes, you have to pay for making all those profit right there. But Brexit is also still with us. Yeah, we see there's UK exporters there facing some glitches there at the EU borders.
Well, yes, this has become a regular feature, particularly at the beginning of the year. You know, we're 2 years past Brexit, and it is still causing a misery for small business owners up and down this country, but particularly hauliers, because they, of course, have to carry the goods from A to B. And I think this morning, or, you know, over the past couple of days, there has been an issue with the goods vehicle management system, which was a piece of technology put in place in 2020 to ensure that all of the updated customs declarations were accessible in a very easy and smooth way. That hasn't been the case. Apparently, the device wasn't accepting 2023, so that caused a lot of backlog and delay. And separately, we're hearing that there is some new legislation that's been put in by the French asking for British hauliers to now only carry documents that are translated into French. So, you know, we're going to be seeing more of this. In fact, I'm sure once the House of Commons sits next week, Brexit is going to once again be at the top of the agenda because it's not working and it's causing huge delays.
Yeah, all the issues still playing into the first month of 2023, and sure, we're going to see more going on. But how the markets look in the UK at intraday?
Markets are looking in tip-top shape, actually. I think we're seeing a fall in the pound as investors await jobless data from the US, and that has a knock-on effect of pushing up the more internationally focused FTSE. So the all-share at intraday is up 0.23%. The FTSE 100 is up by 0.28%. And the FTSE 250, the domestic market, that's down actually. That's down by 0.19%. So the British pound continues to fall against the dollar. I think a pound will get you $1.18 at the moment, down by nearly 0.5%, down to against the euro by 0.34%. But the British pound at intraday is up against the Japanese yen by 0.23%.
All right, yes, the markets are not looking so bad. And Juliana, enjoy the weekend, and maybe you can play for us sometime. I see the piano behind you there. All right, ciao, ciao. All right, that was Juliana giving us the details from the UK. Let's move on to Asia now. We see markets in Asia Pacific traded mostly high as the Federal Reserve signaled further rate hikes ahead. U.S. ADP private payrolls report said employers added 235,000 jobs in December, showing a strong labor market despite the Fed's attempt to tame inflation and suggesting there's room for high rates. South Korea's Kospi gained 1.12% to 2,289 points. Australia's S&P ASX 200 rose 0.65% to close at 7,109 points, while the Nikkei 225 in Japan rose 0.59% to close at 25,973 points. And the Topix inched up 0.37% to 1,875 points. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index pared most of its gains, was marginally low in its final hour of trade as China reportedly signaled more supportive measures for its property sector ahead. Shanghai Composite gained 0.08%, closed at 3,157 points, and the Shenzhen Component rose 0.32%. And U.S. stock futures were little change as investors look ahead for December jobs reports that's due out later today. Strong jobs data in the previous session led to declines in major averages as it pointed to further rate hikes ahead. And behind me there, I see the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures there, it's up 0.19%, while the S&P 500 futures, that's up 0.12%, while tech-heavy NASDAQ, that's the only laggard for the futures market. Let's get a summary of yesterday's close now from our correspondent, Maria Bird.
The U.S. stock market closed down on Thursday, slightly recovered from the day's lows, but still in the final hours could not recover and was still under for the day. As the Dow Jones was down by 1.02% down, the S&P 500 down by 1.16%, and the heavy tech NASDAQ down by 1.47%. Many investors were anticipating what has come out from private payroll data, as well as the anticipated December data on jobs. It is also clear that the tightening of the job market could cause interest rate hikes to increase more than anticipated in 2022. This is causing what many are considering a slow session. We might not be seeing a recession, but a slowing in the U.S. economy.
That was Maria Bird giving us details of summary of close for the U.S. markets yesterday. Well, let's move on to the oil market now. We see oil prices edged up on hopes of a Chinese demand boost, but the broader global economic outlook kept crude benchmarks on course for a weekly decline. Brent crude futures rose 56 cents to $79.25 a barrel, while the U.S. WTI crude futures were up 60 cents at $74.27 a barrel. Both contracts rose more than $1 earlier in the session. China, the world's largest crude oil importer, expects passenger traffic by road, rail, water, and air during the coming Lunar New Year holidays to double from the same period in 2022. China, the economy of which has been hit by another COVID wave, also announced more state support measures yesterday. And gold prices edged higher today, and we're on track for a third straight weekly gain, with investors keenly awaiting key U.S. jobs report to gauge the Federal Reserve's rate hike stance. Spot gold is up 0.1% to $1,835 per ounce. Prices gained about 0.6% so far this week, while U.S. gold futures were flat at $1,839.70 per ounce. The market's focus shifts to the U.S. Labor Department's closely watched non-farm payrolls, data that's due out in a few hours. I will take a break now. When we come back, more stories from the African continent. Do stay with us. This is Business Incorporated. Welcome back now to our next conversation. Now, we want to get a sense of trade between Africa and other continents in 2022 and get an outlook for commodity exports in 2023 from Africa. We have Ted George now, Chief Narrative Officer at Cleo's Advisory. Join us via Zoom. Great to have you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good to be back.
So how was 2022 for Africa trade? We know we saw, sky high prices for commodities in 2022. Was that a good thing for Africa, or was it a bad thing?
Well, it's a real mixed bag, and it depends which country you were. I think certainly for the oil and gas exporters, if we're looking at West Africa, particularly Nigeria or Cote d'Ivoire, they saw a surge in revenues and demand for their exports, and that really swelled the export account. But that's been heavily offset by the fact that the imports of refined products have massively increased in price. And so that's really eaten away a lot of this gain. It's not entirely clear, how much actually Africa has benefited from this increase in prices, but the disruption has been a big problem. And if you bear in mind, like even the cash crop exporters of things like coffee and cocoa, which were very high prices, they saw a huge increase in their own energy costs and the cost of things like fertilizer. So really, I think overall Africa has suffered like the rest of the world, and there's very high prices that we're still dealing with.
Winners and losers in West Africa in terms of energy exports? Because now we're hearing, that oil companies there having to pay that windfall tax.
Exactly. Well, there will certainly be some benefits for certain governments which see huge exports of hydrocarbons. So particularly Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire, but also all across Africa. But I think the real problem has been on the import front. The fact is there are relatively few operational refineries in Africa. Certainly, they don't produce nearly enough product for the entire continent. And so trying to get hold of these imports has been incredibly difficult ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. If you take a country like Senegal, it was getting over half of its petroleum products and probably over half of its fertilizer from either Russia or Ukraine. All of that was disrupted. So just trying to find replace these products is difficult. Prices have gone up for everyone. So I think overall, even though we're seeing this windfall tax, I think across the economies of Africa, the pain has been felt by these high energy import costs.
And how has West Africa coped with, high food prices from 2022 even till now?
Well, it's been extremely difficult. I mean, we saw food prices rise by a further 50% in the first half of last year, and they were already incredibly high. And so that really hurts, particularly the poorest households, which tend to spend over half their money on food. We've seen a real easing of prices in the last quarter. That's not surprising, partly because of an expectation of recession. But I think generally speaking, it's really hurt a lot of the economies. And there's a lot of questions now about the level of nutrition all across the world. So I think certainly for local producers of produce, they've been okay. Some of the harvests have been decent, certainly in West Africa this year. But I think all across the board, everyone's really feeling the pain of the high food prices.
And what about the cash crop exporters? How did they fare in 2022?
Well, I think if you look at cocoa and coffee, for example, they surged to really high prices. Cocoa is still very high as well. And that certainly really helped. It helped countries like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana to keep that high fixed farm gate price. But if you bear in mind the cost of fertilizer, it's roughly doubled the amount for a farmer to fertilize a field. And for a lot of them, they either pay for fertilizer or they pay school fees. And a lot of them, instead of paying school fees, there's a lot less fertilizer. It means a smaller crop next season. So I think the thing is, even though some of these cash crop exporters have really benefited from higher prices, they've really been hurt by these things like higher input costs.
What are you seeing for cocoa and coffee exports in 2023?
Well, look, the outlook's good so far. It's been a very strong start to the season. As far as we can see, cocoa exports are either at the same level or up on last season, which was very good across West Africa. But I think there's a real concern what will happen in what they call the light or the mid crop, which comes up from around March. And that's where we're going to see the impact of, let's say, lower use of fertilizer and inputs. So it's a strong outlook. Prices are strong as well. But the real thing about cocoa and coffee as well, it all comes down to demand, particularly in developed markets. And if we have a real recession biting there, that could drop demand for these commodities and we could see the prices falling. So a good outlook, but uncertain as always when it comes to prices.
Yeah, still so much uncertainty for 2023. But in recent months, the EU has issued new ESG regulations regarding imports of African commodities to the EU. How significant are these? And which commodities are in the crosshairs?
Well, I think they're very significant indeed. I mean, we had COP27 last year looking at the climate, COP15, which finished in December, which was looking specifically at biodiversity. And these are the big issues coming through into 2023. We've seen a lot of pledges and regulations out there about ending deforestation by 2030. All of the soft commodity sectors are linked to that, livestock as well as things like cocoa and coffee. We've also seen a real focus as well from the EU on introducing carbon taxes. That's not just for things like oil and gas and minerals. They're also talking about some agricultural products linked to deforestation, like cocoa, for example. That could completely change the economic model. And there's a broad also effort to try and end all imports to the EU, which are linked either to deforestation or to human rights abuse. That's potentially the entire commodity value chain. So there's very radical legislation coming in, and it directly affects a lot of exporters of commodities in Africa who export into the EU. So there's a lot that needs to be taken on board, and this search for a way to prove you have sustainable supply chains is going to become critical to Africa this year.
All right, let's hope Africa gets it right, with trade in 2023. Thank you so much, Ted George, Chief Narrative Officer, Cleo's Advisory. Thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend.
You too.
All right, now let's look at our stories now from West Africa. See, the Bank of Ghana has authorized 9 institutions to serve as foreign exchange brokers. They are Black Star Brokerage, CSI, Capital, ICAP African Brokers Limited, Obsidian, Ashuna, Regulus, Sapon Capital, and a host of others. According to the Bank of Ghana, the authorization takes effect from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. It said the Bank of Ghana reserved the right to delist any authorized FX broker for non-performance or non-compliance with FX Act and the Interbank FX Market Conduct Rules. And the government of Rwanda secured 37 million euros, a loan from the French Development Agency to transform more public services digitally and develop the country's drone industry. The related agreement is also complemented with a 1.2 million euro grant to mobilize French expertise in project implementation. In Rwanda, drones are being used to deliver blood supplies, support precision agriculture, inspect power lines, conduct aerial mapping of land, and most recently in fighting mosquitoes. An Egyptian Cabinet Information and Decision Support Center revealed that the size of the deep technology market has reached $431.1 million in 2021 and has grown by 20.2% in 2022 to reach $518.2 million. Deep technology refers to the sector of technology industry that tackles complex challenges using technological solutions that are based on scientific or engineering precedents. It differs from shallow tech, which relies more on mass production than research and development. The prevalence of deep tech is echoed in the Middle East, where 31 Middle Eastern companies have collectively invested $32.5 million in the sector in the 9 months ending with September 2021. And that's the show today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ladi Williams. Enjoy the weekend.